listener production.
Hello, happy Friday. Sasha Barbagat with you. This is The Briefing. 2 American astronauts blasted off back in June, bound for the International Space Station. They were meant to be there for an 8-day mission. So why are they still stuck there 2 months later?
I wouldn't say that they're stranded, but I think they're trying to figure out essentially how they're going to get back. The good news is that NASA would not leave them up there, but they are going to be very, very cautious.
In the second half of this episode, we explain what's gone wrong, how and when they're coming back down to Earth, and how NASA and Boeing have stumbled into a PR disaster. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Helen Smith. It is Friday, the 9th of August.
Morning, Sasha. So overnight, Australia has added to its medal haul in Paris. We've nabbed silver in the men's kayak sprint, but we were so close to gold, 0.4 seconds away to be exact, with Germany claiming first place. While in the River Seine, Aussie Mo Johnson has taken out silver in the 10K marathon swim. Australia is also guaranteed more medals in the boxing, with Caitlin Parker and Charlie Senior representing. And we're also in for a chance at gold in the women's water polo, with the side beating the USA in a thrilling penalty shootout semi-final this morning.
And the Australians have done it! What a moment, Gabrielle Palm. Australia will play Spain for gold.
That audio thanks to Nine.
And we are also up for a medal in the women's beach volleyball. So, as it stands now, Australia remains locked into third on the medal tally in what has become our most successful Olympics ever, with 18 gold, 14 silver and 11 bronze. And there are just a few more days left of competition. The closing ceremony happens early on Monday morning our time, so be sure to enjoy your last few days of Olympic action.
A man arrested over an alleged Taylor Swift concert terror plot in Austria has confessed he wanted to, quote, kill as many people as possible. 2 men were arrested and all 3 Taylor Swift sold-out shows in Vienna were cancelled after the terror threats were uncovered. Now, Austrian law enforcement told the media one of the suspects, aged 19, was, quote, clearly radicalised in the direction of the Islamic State and thinks it is right to kill infidels, end quote. He's also pledged allegiance to Islamic State. The man alleged he wanted to use homemade explosives to try and kill as many people as possible outside of the stadium, and authorities say they found bomb-making materials during a raid on his home. The touring company has confirmed that all ticket holders will be refunded, but the shows won't be rescheduled. Moving over to the UK, Swift shows scheduled for next week in London have still been confirmed to go ahead. This does bring back memories of the deadly attacks in 2017 when a suicide bombing happened at an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, killing 22 people. So, yeah, it's very thankful and glad that authorities were able to step up and stop this attack before it even happened.
Years after its initial announcement, the AUKUS deal between Australia, the US and the UK has officially been signed. Deputy PM Richard Marles was in Washington, D.C. this week to rubber stamp the transfer of at least 3 nuclear submarines from America to Down Under in the 2030s. One thing that the deal is contingent on, though, is the president at the time of the transfer of the subs. Donald Trump hasn't yet stated his position on AUKUS, but his VP pick, JD Vance, has said he's a fan of it. We know, of course, Joe Biden was the one who signed this deal 3 years ago with Scott Morrison and at the time Boris Johnson, a very different look. Actually, those 3 countries were led by completely different people 3 years ago. A lot changed. But yeah, so we know that the Democrats are in favour of AUKUS. Kamala Harris would be as well if she wins, but we don't know what Donald Trump's position would be.
And speaking of Donald Trump, he's given a rare press conference from his Mar-a-Lago resort, confirming he will debate Kamala Harris.
The other side has to agree to the terms. They may or may not agree. I don't know if they're going to agree. She hasn't done an interview. She can't do an interview. She's barely competent, and she can't do an interview. But I look forward to the debates because I think we have to set the record straight.
In his rambling speech to the media, the former president said he wanted 3 debates before the November 5th election, starting on September 4 on the Fox network. Whether Harris agrees to that yet is to be seen.
Yeah, so Kamala Harris has said she does want to debate Donald Trump, but he has been the one who was like, well, I don't know, I don't think I will. So he's come out and said he will. He did talk about terms and saying, well, I don't know if the other side will agree, but I do think Harris will want to debate Trump, especially after Biden's showing. There was a lot of lies and half-truths told that Biden did not successfly debunk. So I know Harris is going to want to do that. I did listen into a good chunk of this press conference. Rambling is the right word. He went on and on about poll results, which, to be fair, have been pretty even between the two. I don't think Kamala Harris can't claim a win. Donald Trump can't claim a win. It's even. But he was saying, I'm way ahead in the polls. He talked about the country being sick. He did, though, finally talk about some policy and things that the Republicans want to do should he win in November. Boost the military. He talked about housing for first home buyers. Of course, he talked about the border and securing that. That has been his big talking point so far in the lead up to the vote. One thing, though, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris are continuing their battleground state campaign tour. They're in Arizona and Michigan today. One thing I did see from their campaign, though, which I've loved overnight, is they've released merch. Now, again, American politics and campaigns are very different to ours.
Yeah.
Merch is a huge thing. So they've released this hat, and it's like a camouflage hat. So very reminiscent of what like hunters might wear in the US when they're going out and doing their thing. And it says, Harris Waltz on it. But interestingly, so appealing to Midwestern men and women, the ones that maybe went and turned and voted for Trump at the last election, trying to win them back. Hey, look, we like camo because Waltz is a keen hunter. But this hat also bears strong resemblance to Chappell Roan merch. So she's a pop singer. We talked about her a couple of weeks ago on the show, and she's so popular at the moment, especially with Gen Z. So really interesting to see them playing both sides of the camp.
Yeah, the hat is very camp, as well, which I'm loving. I also saw another bit of merch that I thought, hang on, this can't be real, but it is. It is a Childless Cat Lady Club t-shirt. And the slogan says, wear for all American families, no matter what yours looks like.
Oh.
So the t-shirt says, proud member of the Childless Cat Lady Club, and then Harris and some little paws.
Yeah.
And I think that is very smart marketing.
Yeah, very, very clever. Helen, thank you so much for joining us for the headlines today. Next up, it's our deep dive looking at the astronauts that are currently stranded on the International Space Station. We're trying to find out when they might come home.
Godspeed, Butch and Sunny.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. And liftoff of Starliner and Atlas V, carrying 2 American heroes.
Hey, Bension here. And that was the sound of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft lifting off carrying astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams for an 8-day mission to the International Space Station back in early June. Fast forward more than 60 days later, and Butch and Sunny are still up in orbit at the International Space Station, and NASA now says they'll remain there for some time to come. The American Space Agency says the astronauts will remain orbiting the planet till September 24th at the earliest, and potentially until February next year. Experts say Butch and Sunny are in no more danger than any other astronaut in the International Space Station, and so far as we know, they will be coming home. But what went so wildly wrong as to extend an 8-day mission out to what could be 8 months? And what's it going to be like to be stuck there with no solid return date? Dr. Rebecca Allen is co-director of the Swinburne Space Technology and Industry Institute. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing. Can you clear this up for us? Are Butch and Sunny stranded in space?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're stranded, but I think their about 10-week vacation that they planned for the ISS has been extended, and they're trying to figure out essentially how they're going to get back. The good news is that NASA would not leave them up there, but they are going to be very, very cautious about whether or not they risk putting 2 astronauts in the Starliner capsule, which we're not quite sure the source of the issues. So they don't want to risk any lives. So they're not stranded per se, but they're definitely having to extend their stay at the ISS.
How can we be confident that they're not in any great danger? If someone listening to this doesn't know a great deal about the detail of an operation of this kind, how can we know that there's no massive risk beyond what is normal for an astronaut in space?
Well, that's exactly why NASA and Boeing have been doing almost 2 months worth full of testing, because they absolutely won't risk a capsule failing to be able to get back to Earth safely. And so that goes back to the original issues that we were seeing when Starliner was attempting to dock with the space station, around the fact that these thrusters were failing and there was at least one known helium leak. And now the initial data is starting to show some troubling things around the seals with the helium. And so even though through the testing, even doing a hot fire test with the capsule where they fired up the thrusters, everything seems to be working fine. But NASA absolutely will not risk the astronauts' lives. And we have to ensure that they would be able to safely detach from the space station and then get into an orbit where they're able to safely come back down to Earth.
Can you explain what this mission was meant to achieve and what the original plan was?
So just a little bit of background. So we know that SpaceX's Dragon capsule has demonstrated that a commercial provider can ferry astronauts to and from low Earth orbit to the International Space Station. And Boeing Starliner was also awarded a massive contract through the same program with NASA to be able to develop a similar capability. And that was to ensure that NASA wasn't reliant on just one commercial provider. And we've seen the issues with, even though the Soyuz capsule has been very reliable throughout the years, given geopolitical tensions, NASA wanted to ensure its own way back into space after the shuttle program was retired. And so Starliner was meant to demonstrate that this crewed capsule was able to carry crew. It's safe, it's reliable, it does exactly what it's supposed to when it is launched, docks with the space station, then undocks and returns to Earth. And the astronauts, then Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, were going to spend about 8 days on the space station analyzing the capsule and the data from their trip to station to say, okay, systems check, everything looks great, we're ready to go back now. And so what's happened is they were delayed kind of launching, and there was a lot of checks, and they knew that there was a helium leak. Helium is used to actually push the propellant to drive the thrusters. So there's definitely a related issue there. And so this is where kind of we're sitting now, is that the capsule did successfully make it to station. Boeing are very confident with the testing results that they could get the astronauts safely back. But what we're waiting on is to hear whether NASA completely agrees with that or not.
NASA has now said that these astronauts could be up there until up to February 2025.
Yes.
Do they have enough food and air and supplies to stay up there that long?
Look, they do. That's the good thing about going to station. And they've just had a resupply mission with the Cygnus spacecraft with Northrop Grumman 21. But it's not ideal because it means, there's another mission, another crewed mission, Crew 9, which is supposed to come and relieve the astronauts that are there. So what it really does is it causes a massive headache, because now we're having to readjust supplies and missions that were meant for that other mission, including that Starliner is taking up a valuable docking spot where the Crew 9 Dragon vessel is supposed to come.
I've read that it used to be a common motto in aviation and space industries that if it's not Boeing, I'm not going. as in it had a great reputation. But this year, there was that emergency exit door blowing off a Boeing 737 MAX in January. In March, we had a regulator reporting Boeing's failures in manufacturing quality control. And now this. How is it that things have gone so wrong for Boeing?
Honestly, I can only speculate, and I think it's really sad to see because Boeing has had this very important role with NASA going back to the early days of their operations in space and certainly in the shuttle program. And so when we think of humans in space, it really is synonymous with Boeing being part of that journey. But, you know, with the challenges now is you have these massive organizations, and the same part of the organization that manages the aircraft is not the same part of the organization that manages the spacecraft. And even within those areas, you have these different teams. And so, you know, first of all, these are massive goalposts that we're trying to get across. And so building things for space is not easy. And even when everything goes right in the testing, you're still going to have setbacks and delays. And you add in a pandemic. And so I think they've just really been unlucky, whereas SpaceX, on the other hand, were just lucky in their timing. And of course, you know, not to take any credit away from the incredible work that SpaceX has done, but part of it is that issue is just not having the same fortune when it comes to doing that. But also you're in a massive organization, whereas SpaceX, that's what they do. They build the rockets, they build these crewed spacecraft, and so they're very dedicated to that. And Boeing is a massive organization which is doing many different things.
You mentioned Elon Musk's SpaceX there. How might that come into the picture in the next months?
Well, it looks like for now, one of the most likely scenarios is that the Crew 9 vessel does come to the space station, but instead of it carrying 4 astronauts to relieve the 4 that are there, that potentially it could just come up half crewed and stay for a much shorter duration, or Suni and Butch stay on and kind of take the place of those crew and stay on for that until they do wait until 2025 when Crew 10 is supposed to then come relieve them. So that is what it's looking like, is that the Dragon capsule and the Crew 9 mission could be changed. So right now, Crew 9 has been delayed until at least mid-September. And so I think that's exactly the planning that's happening right now. Is do you keep Suni and Butch there and they replace 2 of the Crew 9 astronauts and they stay on? And then what happens to the fate of the Starliner capsule is still up in the air? Or are NASA going to really analyze this testing data with Boeing and be confident that Suni and Butch can come back on the Boeing? So SpaceX might get to play a bit of the hero here and bring them back, which would doubly be disappointing for Boeing.
What does an astronaut actually do in the International Space Station day to day?
Their schedules are so organized, literally down to the minute. They are nonstop doing science and doing research, and also repairing the aging modular system that they live in. So they might be doing repairs on a air filtration or a food system, or they might be managing experiments. For example, on the resupply mission on Cygnus, we actually had our student-led payload that's looking at mushrooms and microgravity. And so those astronauts probably right now, they're unpacking that resupply capsule, and they're verifying the different experiments, and they'll go about starting them up. And there was over 1,000 kilograms of science, if I'm correct, that came on that resupply. So even though there's not that many of them up there, they're doing so much science, and they themselves are actually part of the science. So that's another consideration with changing Crew 9 and the actual crew that are there, is you're changing the specialists that are on board the station.
We've heard a lot about space junk orbiting alongside the International Space Station. How do you stop things crashing into it?
Well, the short answer is that you don't. These tiny, mostly microscopic objects, or, at the most things which are not bigger than a pea, they are traveling over 1,000 kilometers a second. So they're really traveling very quickly. Wow. And so the idea is that they're so small that hopefully any damage that's inflicted by those or micrometeorites is negligible or repairable. But also we're starting to see solutions that come up. Even Australia-led companies like Space Machines Company are looking at ways that they can kind of vacuum up this debris or move defunct satellites out of orbits and keep more debris from being created. There's some companies which are looking at actually adding technology to things like the space station where it can actually catch this debris and maybe even recycle it. So it's pretty much paramount because there's so little that can be done about things colliding with the space station unless it's bigger craft that we're tracking, that we can change its orbit, that we reduce the amount of debris that's in orbit to begin with.
And finally, when do you think we'll know when these astronauts are coming back home?
So, I think that we are going to see in the next week to 2 weeks, NASA will make a decision whether or not they are staying on to become part of that Crew 9 mission, or if they think that it's safe enough to bring them back on Boeing. And they might actually even determine that they want to fly Crew 9 as is, and that means Crew 8 has to board their capsule and come back. And then Crew 9 gets on and comes up, and Suni and Butch just hang out while NASA says, you know what, we've got all this test data. We're actually now going to take a month or 2 or 3 months to evaluate it. So I think we could know within a week or 2. I will say that it is looking like Suni and Butch will be there for at least a few more months, if not into next year.
Dr. Rebecca Allen there. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen and leave us a review. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you soon.
Listener.